Are going to continue to build up across eastern Scotland in particular as we go through the next day or so. Very high rainfall totals could be in excess of 200 millimetres for some parts. It is going to be a mild night with lots of wet and windy weather around, temperatures not dropping much, and gusts of winds coming in from the east of around 60-70 miles per hour for some eastern coastal parts. Friday then is going to be a wet picture for many of us. Heavy rain across Northern Ireland into northern England and rain continuing across eastern parts of Scotland, which is why some severe disruption is quite likely. Towards the southwest though, a dry picture with a scattering of showers, and here temperatures a few degrees above average for the time of year. Elsewhere feeling cooler with the wind and the rain. It is going to be another wet day for many eastern northeastern areas on Saturday. The rain not quite as heavy as we go through Friday, but likely to cause some further issues because of the heavy rain that it's coming on the back of. Otherwise, it's a drier picture for many parts of England and Wales with a scattering of showers. Sunday looks like a quieter day with more showers possible by next week.
Who is it?
We're here for the show.
More energy this time!
Welcome to the Dinosaur Hour. I was married to a therapist.
And you survived?
I thought we were getting Hugh Laurie.
Second best.
You interviewed Saddam Hussein. What's that like?
I was terrified. I'm playing strip poker with these three.
Ah!
No, thank you.
My CDs need to be put in alphabetical order.
Are you going to be problematic again?
The Dinosaur Hour. Sunday, the 29th of October at 9 on GB News.
What you get for breakfast is something that, if we do our jobs right, you will wake up to news that you didn't know the night before.
It's a conversation. It's not just me and Eamon.
We want to get to know you, and we want you to get to know us.
From 6, it's Breakfast with Eamon and Isabel.
Monday to Thursdays on GB News.
Britain's news channel.
People in Britain, they love free speech, but they also love fair play.
I don't care if I'm speaking somebody from a trade union, from the Labour Party, somebody from the SNP. And I think the viewers like to see that actually we can challenge one another, but in a positive way.
We think we ask the questions that people want to ask, and often we ask the questions that we wanted to ask in Parliament but never got the chance to ask.
So join us every Saturday, 10 a.m. till noon on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
Nightmare commute. Kick it up a gear with me, Patrick Christie's, at drive time, 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News Radio. You can listen online and on DAB+, on the smart speaker app and on the GB News app. And if you've got an Alexa, all you have to say is, Alexa, play GB News. We're also on TuneIn and the Radio Player apps. From the school run to rush hour, get revved up with me, Patrick Christie's, on GB News and GB News Radio.
Tired of the usual focus-tested, pre-prepared Westminster runaround? Well, so am I.
So you want higher taxes?
Is your department to blame for this? Are you rethinking this policy? Every Sunday at 9:30, I'll be sitting down with those in power to get the truth about the issues affecting you.
Let's be honest, we've known about the cost pressures of this project for years, not months.
That's the Camilla Tominey Show, a politics show with personality. On GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join us every night on GB News at 11 p.m. for Headliners, which is 3 top comedians going through the next day's news stories, which is exactly what you need, because when the establishment has gone crazy, you need some craziness to make sense of it.
Headliners. You don't have to bother reading the newspaper. We've got it covered for you. Every night at 11 p.m. and repeated every morning at 5 a.m. We won't send you to sleep like some of the other paper review shows out there.
So join us 11 p.m. every night on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hello, good evening. It's me, Jacob Rees-Mogg, on State of the Nation tonight. As the Prime Minister visits Israel in a show of solidarity, the Israeli President has blasted the BBC for its refusal to call the genocidal Islamists of Hamas what they are: terrorists. The Prime Minister, the Leader of the Opposition, the US President, and especially our apolitical king knows what they are. So why doesn't the licence fee-funded public broadcaster get with the programme. And speaking of terrorism, the BBC was more than happy to report the killings in Brussels this week as an act of terror. So why is killing 2 people in Belgium an act of terror, but not killing 1,300 people in Israel? And as it emerges the suspect entered Europe via small boats in the Mediterranean, it once again goes to show the importance of borders. In domestic news, the Prime Minister is reportedly set to ban gay and trans conversion therapy, but with the sinister components associated with conversion therapy already illegal, could this be the law used to silence skeptics of gender ideology, as well as therapists trying to help those suffering with gender dysphoria? Wage growth is surpassing inflation at 8.5%, which means the triple lock could be forcing the Treasury to fork out billions, as pensions could increase by £900 next April. But Downing Street has hinted at a shift that could save £900 million. How will this go down in election year? Plus, these islands welcome their newest king to the historical record as a new coin bearing the name Esunertos has been unearthed in a Hampshire field. Well, he is welcome to the list of kings. He of course pales in comparison to the mighty Mogg King of Mendip. State of the Nation starts now. I'll also be joined by a Moggalicious panel this evening, former Brexit Party MEP Annunziata Rees-Mogg and the broadcaster and commentator Narinder Kaur. As always, I want to hear from you. It's a crucial part of the programme. Email me, mailmog@GBNews. But now it's time for the news today with Aaron Armstrong.
Very good evening to you. It's Aaron Armstrong here in the GB newsroom. The Prime Minister has held talks with Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman in the Saudi capital Riyadh, his latest stop in a series of diplomatic meetings in the Middle East. Rishi Sunak encouraged Saudi Arabia to use its influence to support stability in the region. The pair agreed about the importance of avoiding any further escalation of the Israel-Hamas conflict. The Prime Minister will make further stops in the Middle East. They are yet to be announced. Well, earlier in Jerusalem, the Prime Minister told his Israeli counterpart, Benjamin Netanyahu, that he welcomed the decision to allow humanitarian aid into Gaza from Egypt and said the UK stood in solidarity with Israel. And Mr Netanyahu thanked him for visiting the country, calling it a strong statement of support in a time of darkness. Rishi Sunak, though, stressed Israel must adhere to international law in Gaza and the conflict must not spread elsewhere.
Good, productive conversations with both Prime Minister Netanyahu and the Israeli President Herzog. Among other things, we discussed the importance of this conflict not escalating regionally and the importance of getting humanitarian aid into Gaza to help people who need it. I also had the opportunity to meet families of British nationals who have been taken hostage. We're doing absolutely everything we can to get them home.
Asylum seekers have returned to the Bibby Stockholm in Portland Port, despite activists attempting to prevent it from happening. Just Stop Oil protesters obstructed a coach carrying migrants holding banners that read "No prison ships" and "Demand humanity." All 39 people were removed from the barge in August after Legionella bacteria was discovered. More than 400 homes have been asked to evacuate in the Scottish town of Brechin in preparation for the arrival of Storm Babette. A red weather warning has been issued, meaning there's a risk to life, with extensive flooding and winds stronger than 70 miles an hour forecast. And next month's MTV Europe Music Awards in Paris have been cancelled due to security concerns amid the ongoing conflict in Israel and Gaza. Taylor Swift, Olivia Rodrigo, Bad Bunny and the Foo Fighters were to be among the nominees for the event in Paris. Organisers have cited the volatility of world events. France is currently on its highest security alert level after the murder of a school teacher in a suspected Islamist attack last week. Well, this is GB News on TV, on digital radio and on your smart speaker too. That's it for the moment. Now it's back to Jacob.
Well, this was the Prime Minister, Rishi Sunak, speaking to the President of Israel earlier today.
First and foremost, I wanted to express my solidarity with you and your country after you have suffered something unspeakable, a barbaric act of terrorism, and to your last point, we should call it what it is, an act of terrorism perpetrated by an evil terrorist organisation, Hamas. That's what I believe, and that's what we will continue to say.
Of terrorism perpetrated by an evil terrorist organisation, Hamas. And this was the leader of the opposition speaking last week on the matter.
Real sense of deep anxiety, obviously in relation to the events in Israel, the appalling, shocking events, cold-blooded murder of men, women and children. And it's terrorism, and Hamas bears the responsibility.
It's terrorism and Hamas bears the responsibility, US President Joe Biden said last week.
The brutality of Hamas, his bloodthirstiness brings to mind the worst rampages of ISIS. This is terrorism. But sadly, for the Jewish people, it's not.
This is terrorism. Even a spokesman for His Majesty the King said His Majesty is appalled by and condemns the barbaric act of terrorism in Israel. Donald Trump, James Cleverly, David Lammy, just about every respectable person or institution seems willing to call this brutal act what it is, terrorism. But the public service broadcaster paid for by you is unwilling to do this. When two people were tragically killed in Brussels this week, the BBC was willing to call it terrorism. And in the past, the BBC has been willing to use the term terror attack too. In 2017, when a terrorist killed civilians on Westminster Bridge and a policeman outside Parliament, the BBC rightly called it a terror attack. In the 2015 Paris Bataclan attack, the BBC called it a terror attack too. So when terrorists attack London, Paris or Brussels, it's terrorism, but when it's Israel, it's not. And I'm afraid this points to something very undesirable at the BBC. During discussion on BBC Arabic last week, this happened.
وينضم إلينا من تل أبيب محمد كعبية.
أولا ردا على من تكلم من قبلي في معكم، حماس ما فعلته هو ما يناقض كل المعايير الإنسانية والشريعة الإسلامية. هم لم يحاربوا جيش الدفاع، هم قتلوا ناس عزل أبرياء في بيوتهم، هم قتلوا أطفال ونساء وقاموا بخطفهم إلى غزة. هذه المشاهد.
ولكن محمد هذا ما فعلته إسرائيل أيضا.
دخلوا إلى
In this clip, the BBC host was trying to defend the massacre of 1,200 people by comparing it to Israel's attempt to defeat terrorists. The public service broadcast is trying to create an equivalence between a democratic state and terrorism. The BBC has just taken several Middle East journalists off air for alleged social media activity, including liking posts of dead Israeli bodies. Why should anyone remotely sympathetic to Israel in its situation be forced to continue to pay the licence fee when the BBC's Middle East journalists mislead viewers about Israel's actions, when its staff show their true colours on social media, appearing to support or at least sympathise with a terror group, and when it can't tell the truth about Hamas? Of course, I want to hear from you. Let me know your thoughts via mailmog@gbnews.com. Well, joining me now is Roger Bolton, former BBC editor and presenter. Roger, thank you very much for joining me. Why has the BBC so stubbornly decided not to call what Hamas did terrorism?
Well, can I just say that that's an extraordinary introduction. There are a whole range of brilliant, brave BBC journalists, Lise Doucette, Jeremy Bowen, working flat out in dangerous circumstances to report fairly. Now, in these circumstances, the BBC will make mistakes for which they've apologised. But for you to categorise the BBC, oh, I don't work, they fired me twice, in this way is totally unfair and unrepresentative. Right. Having said that, the problem is the BBC has called these acts of terror, but is worried about calling the organisation terrorist organisation, because where do you stop? What do you call the Chinese government when it's treating the Uyghurs in the way they are? What do you call the Burmese, and now formerly Burmese government, the way it's behaving? What do you call the Uganda government with what it's doing? The BBC's job is to report fairly and objectively. Where it gets it wrong, you pointed out, it should apologise when it gets it wrong. But it has described facts and
It did get it wrong yesterday when it said that the hospital must have been, or was most likely to have been, bombed by Israel, which now seems extremely unlikely. And this stubbornness on the word terrorism, in its first report, that is what it said. And I mean, Tom Tugendhat went through this very clearly on the Today programme this morning.
Sorry, Jacob, I'm sorry to interrupt you. But it did correct that. It makes mistakes. It must correct it. But for you to categorize that single mistake as being representative of the reporting, anybody who listens to the Today programme knows that is not true.
That mistake is very important when it ties in with the refusal to call terrorism terrorism. It's trying to equate a democratic government with a terrorist organisation and treat their claims equally, which can't be sensible journalism.
Well, it's sensible journalism to report what you know to be facts and to seek alternative and other views. And that is what the BBC does. Look, I've heard the BBC say of those what happened in Israel is terrorism, and so they should call it that. But just like the IRA 30 or 40 years ago, you know, they committed terrorist acts, but they were militant Republicans. What the BBC as well, and what the BBC is concerned about, is the BBC wants people to believe what they say, and they're addressing those people who don't want to believe what they say. So the BBC starts reporting saying, this is a terrorist organisation. Those people who perhaps support Hamas or might be thinking of it will say, oh, well, look, there's a BBC. We can't believe a word they say. It's probably sensible for the BBC to simply report the atrocities.
Roger, that's an extraordinary thing to say, that they should be trying to appeal to people who support Hamas. People who are supporting Hamas have supported the murder of 1,200 people, the slaughter of 1,200 people. Surely that's not who the BBC is trying to appeal to. It's trying to tell the truth, that a terrible act of terror has been committed.
Jacob, they're not trying to appeal. What they're trying to do is to report and get those people who do not wish to believe what Hamas did to believe what Hamas did. But the other thing you've got to remember, of course, in these circumstances, is that there's a war going on, there's a propaganda war going on, and Israel in the past and its armed forces have not told the truth.
That's why it was so important when it got it wrong on the hospital as an immediate thought that it was done by Israel. That was a terrible mistake. It wasn't just a minor error. In all of your saying, they should have waited, they should have been more patient, but they called it as Israel straight away.
Yes, they should have waited. It was a mistake, but they corrected it as soon as possible and have gone on since correcting it. Whereas you seem to say that's the BBC position. It isn't.
All right, well, thank you, Roger. I'm now joined by John Mayer, the former BBC current affairs producer and author of multiple books on the BBC and its licence fee. If people are offended by the BBC's failure to call terrorism terrorism, there's nothing they can do, is there, if they want to carry on watching television? They can't cancel their licence fee.
Jacob, good evening. You need to watch a bit more TV and not appear on it so often. Then you'd actually have a more balanced view of everything. You know, look, the BBC is a universal world service. It broadcasts 24/7 in 43 languages every day about that war. What's the story? Is the story about the war or the terrorism?
Well, the story is about the terrorism, but it's also about the fact that many people in this country who are compelled to pay a licence fee and are penalised if they refuse to pay it are finding that the BBC is not calling terrorism terrorism, which is deeply offensive.
Jacob, after your programme, sit down and watch television. You know, they get bloody good value for it. They get a universal service, they get radio, TV and everything.
Yeah, but why can't I decide that? Why should I have to pay it compulsorily?
The reporting I'm seeing coming out of Israel is pretty superb. As my former boss, Roger Bolton, said, I've seen seriously superb reporting. And the BBC is the only broadcaster to have a reporter in Gaza at the moment. What do ITV and the Sky call Hamas? Do they call them terrorists?
The BBC is the only one that is compulsorily funded. That's the difference. It's taxpayer funded. If you don't watch Sky or ITV, their advertising revenues go down. They're not forced to be funded by people who are actually quite offended that they're not calling terrorists terrorists.
Jacob, what do Sky and ITN
But this is completely irrelevant because they're not a state broadcaster funded by taxation. That's the point, is why should people pay for an organisation of the BBC that won't even join the king, who has called Hamas terrorists?
There we go. You know, Jacob, look, this is a whole pack of hyenas like you who go around looking for BBC causes. This is just the latest one of them. You don't like the BBC, you don't like the licence fee, well, suck it. You know, most people do.
I don't dislike the BBC. I do dislike the licence fee because it's a compulsion on people who don't necessarily want to watch it and find that the BBC's entrenched views and attitudes are not theirs. And this failure, this stubbornness not to call a massacre of 1,200 people terrorism is really extraordinary.
So why did the Palestinians paint the BBC red last weekend? Why were the Israelis protesting outside of the BBC? You know, is the BBC getting it right if both of those people are complaining about them? You know, how are you going to finance the BBC? Just think, you know, it is an objective reporting, as Roger said, doing good objective reporting.
Well, clearly not, because it got it wrong when it accused Israel of having blown up the hospital, when all the evidence now seems to show that it was a Hamas rocket that failed, and that the BBC's immediate reaction was to blame Israel. That was the initial instinct of the BBC.
As you said in your introduction, Jacob, the BBC's, I think, suspended some of the staff in BBC Arabic as a result of some of their behaviour. So it does show that the BBC, it corrects, self-corrects all the time. So, you know, it's not a monolith, you know, they're interested in the truth.
So why doesn't it correct this and just call what Hamas did terrorism? Because that would really settle this, and it would put the BBC in a much stronger position.
So if Israel commits horrific acts in the next few weeks, should we call the Israeli state terrorists as well?
Well, this is highly speculative. Israel hasn't done that, and Israel has a right of self-defense in international law. So this is an entirely separate speculation.
As far as I understand it, Jacob, Hamas is an elected government in Gaza.
This is really the issue, isn't it? That you and the BBC, and I know you no longer work there, think that Hamas and Israel are equivalent.
No, we don't. I mean, you know, I think what went on the 7th of October was absolutely disgusting. You know, horrific acts.
Do you think it was terrorism?
Worldwide. It's a worldwide trusted broadcaster. And
do you think it's terrorism? Now asking you personally, just to finish, do you think it's terrorism?
No, I think it's horrific. I don't think it's terrorism.
You don't think it's terrorism? Thank you very much, John. There you go, the voice no longer working for the BBC, but giving a good insight into the BBC. Don't forget to let me know your thoughts, mailmog@gbnews.com. Coming up next, as the BBC was willing to refer to the Brussels attacks as one of terror, new revelations suggest that the terrorist came across the Mediterranean in a boat and was in the country illegally. Plus, on a slightly lighter note, should Polish mannequins be arrested?
Who is it? We're here for the show.
More energy this time!
Welcome to the Dinosaur Hour. I was married to a therapist.
And you survived?
I thought we were getting Hugh Laurie. Second best. You interviewed Saddam Hussein. What's that like?
I was terrified. I'm playing strip poker with you three.
Oh! No, thank you.
My CDs need to be put in alphabetical order.
Are you going to be problematic again?
The Dinosaur Hour. Sunday, the 29th of October at 9 on GB News.
What you get for breakfast is something that, if we do our jobs right, you will wake up to news that you didn't know the night before.
It's a conversation. It's not just me and Eamon.
We want to get to know you, and we want you to get to know us.
From 6, it's Breakfast with Eamon and Isabel.
Monday to Thursdays on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
People in Britain, they love free speech, but they also love fair play.
I don't care if I'm speaking somebody from a trade union, from the Labour Party, somebody from the SNP. And I think the viewers like to see that actually we can challenge one another, but in a positive way.
We think we ask the questions that people want to ask, and often we ask the questions that we wanted to ask in Parliament but never got the chance to ask.
So join us every Saturday, 10 a.m. till noon on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
Nightmare commute. Kick it up a gear with me, Patrick Christie's, at Drive Time, 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News Radio. You can listen online and on DAB+, on the smart speaker app and on the GB News app. And if you've got an Alexa, all you have to say is, Alexa, play GB News. We're also on TuneIn and the Radio Player apps. From the school run to rush hour, get revved up with me, Patrick Christie's, on GB News and GB News Radio.
Tired of the usual focus-tested, pre-prepared Westminster runaround? Well, so am I.
So you want higher taxes?
Is your department to blame for this? Are you rethinking this policy? Every Sunday at 9:30, I'll be sitting down with those in power to get the truth about the issues affecting you. Let's be honest, we've known about the cost pressures of this project for years, not months. That's the Camilla Tominey Show, a politics show with personality. On GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join us every night on GB News at 11 p.m. for Headliners, which is 3 top comedians going through the next day's news stories, which is exactly what you need, because when the establishment has gone crazy, you need some craziness to make sense of it.
Headliners. You don't have to bother reading the newspaper. We've got it covered for you. Every night at 11 p.m. and repeated every morning at 5 a.m. We won't send you to sleep like some of the other paper review shows out there.
So join us 11 p.m. every night on GB News,
the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back. I'm still Jacob Rees-Mogg, and this is State of the Nation. You've been getting in touch with your thoughts. Jill says the licence fee must be scrapped if the BBC is no longer representing the people who pay for the service. And Henry says the BBC is independent. You should not be lecturing it on what adjective it applies to Hamas. Well, even if it is independent, doesn't mean you can't argue with it and complain. That must be the right of licence fee payers and anyone else. As I touched on before the break, a brutal attack in Brussels earlier this week saw 2 Swedish tourists killed and a man in his mid-40s named in Belgian media as Abdel Salam was shot dead at the scene by Belgian police, with authorities treating the incident as a terror attack. Sweden's prosecutor's office said it believes he was inspired to commit the killings by the Islamic State, you know, the group the BBC does seem to be willing to refer to as terrorists. But perhaps most revealingly, the deceased suspect is believed to be a Tunisian national in Belgium illegally after having had his asylum application rejected in 2020. So in a world in which the neoliberal consensus errs on the side of abolishing borders altogether, seeing them as an anachronistic institution of the past, surely this is clear evidence in support of secure borders. I'm joined now by my panel, constituted by the former Brexit Party MEP, Annunziata Rees-Mogg, and the broadcaster and social commentator, Nurinder Kaur. Nurinder, thank you for joining me. Isn't it important that we have secure borders, because if you have leaky borders, then the risk of terrorists getting in increases?
Well, of course, it's so important to have secure borders. No one is, you know, campaigning for open borders. However, I really do fear this kind of language, Jacob, that comes from, you know, extreme right-wingers, that asylum seekers, somehow they come in, they're going to cause terrorist attacks. That's incorrect. There's been numerous studies done, so many over the years, that actually there's no correlation between immigration and criminality. There is no correlation. In fact, we are more at risk of a terrorist attack by British-born extremists, not by asylum seekers. This demonisation of asylum seekers must stop. And you know what? We are risking upsetting the Islamic community that live peacefully in this country. And if you upset them, it's just, you know, it's like demonising. It's causing Islamophobia. We've had the Manston firebomb, the attack. That's not it's not nice.
No one wants to demonise the Muslim community, and I think everyone recognises that most people in all communities in this country live here in a law-abiding way. But don't you want to make sure that people coming here come legally, so that you can screen them, so you can understand who they are, and have a feeling as to whether they may be at risk of committing crimes? And that's why it's important to maintain secure borders.
No, but then you're still saying that you're pointing at asylum seekers and saying they could be criminal and they're terrorists. That's wrong. You can't point at...
No, you're
They've
not.
come from... They are coming, you know, with desperation, and you're labelling them all as terrorists, possible terrorists.
No, those who have their claims accepted for asylum are coming here out of dire need. They need a safe haven, and the British people are a generous lot and provide that for those in genuine need. If we take the case of Abdel Salam Lassoud, he was not a genuine case in need. He was refused asylum by the Italians in 2012. He was thrown out of Sweden in 2014. He was then done again in having returned to Italy for being highly likely to fall prey of extremists and become one. He then disappeared for a few years, applied in Belgium, and they refused him too. So every single country, he moved without borders, without checks, around. He disappeared into the illegal communities,
But
he did foster
the
exact extremism that the authorities had thought he would. And if we just take
we are
the
more at
big
risk picture, of British-born
let's take
extremists.
The big picture. He is just one. You're absolutely right. It's estimated that in Belgium there are 150,000 in his situation who have had their claims denied or refused for various reasons, including likelihood to commit terror. 150,000. They don't know where they are. They are all living in the black economy. In the UK, we don't publish those figures, but it is estimated that it's between 800,000 and 1.2 million, up to the last time anyone bothered to estimate.
800,000, 1.2 million what?
People
who
are unknown in this country, who have come
and
here.
Whose fault is that? There's a
totally
process.
Illegally, or they've overstayed their visa and disappeared into our black economy.
And how many of those are committing crimes?
Of those,
how many of those are committing crimes?
Well, they're all committing crimes because they're here illegally.
Right,
so
but
that's crime, but not terrorist crimes.
And which crimes we do not know, because they are living in the black economy without any trace.
But they're not committing terrorist.
They are committing crimes.
They're not committing terrorist crimes, and you are demonising an entire community.
I am not demonising.
You're demonising the entire Muslim community.
I am criminalising people who are criminals. This is a very,
How do you know they're criminals?
Because they are living here illegally using the black market. That is criminal.
The fact is that we
they
are
have broken the law. How do you define criminal?
The British public.
How do you define criminal?
The British public are more at risk from British-born extremists, and that's a fact.
And
so you are pointing at asylum seekers, 40,000 that come over.
Totally undocumented to live in this country, the higher that risk becomes. And they also cause others to become more extremist in themselves. We don't know who these people are, where they're from, or why they're here.
And whose fault is that? When they come over here, they are
people who don't deport them straight away.
2 years, they are waiting to be processed. And in that time, they actually they disappear. But you can't say that they are terrorists.
Layers of international laws that we are extremely good at following, but that allow appeal after appeal on the most ridiculous causes.
You don't have any facts
right to having a family life with his cat.
You don't have any facts at all.
And then
that they are here to cause terrorism. I think it's really dangerous.
I think we're getting some degree of agreement, because you seem to be saying that we should have proper control of our borders and then they wouldn't be here legally.
No, what I'm saying is that we do need secure control of our borders. Of course we do. However, when people are coming over here claiming refuge and they're asylum seekers...
These are not refugees.
How do you know? How do you know?
Legally, if you're a genuine refugee.
How do you know?
You are not a criminal.
You are treating them. You are treating them. They are coming here in desperation, and you've got no compassion in your heart.
You have no idea of that.
They haven't caused any terrorism. You are sitting there.
Know that.
But there's a 90% success rate of applications for asylum plus from people from Syria and Afghanistan. So if they are genuine refugees, their chance of getting asylum are extremely high.
Yes.
So they could do it legally. I think you and Nunziata are broadly agreeing that we need proper control of our borders, and we need them to remove
people. But we don't need to be
demonising
and saying they're terrorists. I think that's a scandalous thing to say. It's absolutely scandalous.
I'm not saying that all of them are terrorists. That would be an absurd thing to claim. But of the, let's average out 801.2, of the 1 million up to 2017, and we know it's grown since then, 52% are from Asia.
So they're not... What does that mean?
So they're not asylum seekers,
They're not
I think
asylum
that's the point.
seekers.
But...
No, but that doesn't mean they're terrorists.
No, it doesn't.
It doesn't mean that.
Asylum seekers.
I've allowed you the last word. Thank you very much, my panel. Coming up next, we'll be discussing the government's plan to introduce a ban on gay and trans conversion therapy with veteran LGBT rights campaigner Peter Tatchell. Plus, is it time to restore Mogg, King of Mendip, back into the historic record?
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I think the most exciting bit for me is talking to ordinary people.
People who I think are ignored often by the major news channels
we're going to give news they want to hear. There's a voice there that needs to be heard. I think there's a chance here for a diversity of opinion to be expressed, which you don't find elsewhere. It's really exciting.
We don't hold back. We're free to say how decisions that are taken here
affect us all around the country. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
There's only 3 people you can trust in life: your doctor, your lawyer, and your nana.
I'm not sure.
So join me, Nana Aquia, at 3 p.m. every Saturday and Sunday, where we discuss the biggest topics of the weekend. Be ready for battle.
Could you be quiet? What is this?
It's
my new teeth. It's your new teeth.
I don't bite. Well, not without a good reason. Always honest, always fun. Every weekend at 3 p.m. on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
So Jubes and Kerr, we tackle the issues of the day with real, robust debate, both sides of the fence, battling it out with me in the middle with my forthright opinions and views. And often really interesting things happen because you start with a position and then by the end of the debate you find actually, I might not have thought about that one.
What we need in this country is 2 new political parties.
You should maybe think about doing a 2024 calendar. I'm Michelle Dewberry and I'm keeping you company right through until 7 o'clock this evening.
GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's watching.
Join us every night on GB News at 11 p.m. for Headliners, which is 3 top comedians going through the next day's news stories, which is exactly what you need, because when the establishment has gone crazy, you need some craziness to make sense of it.
Headliners. You don't have to bother reading the newspaper. We've got it covered for you. Every night at 11 p.m. and repeated every morning at 5 a.m. We won't send you to sleep like some of the other paper review shows out there.
So join us 11 p.m. every night on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Who is it? We're here for the show.
More energy this time!
Welcome to the Dinosaur Hour. I was married to a therapist.
And you survived?
I thought we were getting Hugh Laurie, second best. You interviewed Saddam Hussein. What's that like?
I was terrified. I'm playing strip poker with you 3.
Oh!
No, thank you.
My CDs need to be put in alphabetical order.
Are you going to be problematic again?
The Dinosaur Hour. Sunday, the 29th of October at 9 on GB News.
Welcome back. I remain Jacob Rees-Mogg, and you've been getting in touch with your thoughts. Sarah says, I like Sarah's point. You're absolutely right. If you're an illegal refugee, then you've already broken the law. Brian, I also like what Brian has to say. Jacob, thank you so much for putting the BBC in its place. You have restored my faith in the UK. And Stu, again, Stu's marvellous, excellent selection of mail mogs this evening. It's simple, Jacob. You're absolutely spot on. We need tougher security at borders. So thank you. You are allowed to disagree with me in mail mogs, though obviously I prefer it if you agree. Following a backlash from Conservative MPs and ministers, Rishi Sunak has decided to continue with his plans to ban both gay and trans conversion therapy. The Prime Minister will include a draft bill in the King's Speech, which will make it a criminal offence to attempt to change someone's sexuality and gender ideology in England and Wales. Campaigners have repeatedly called for conversion therapy to be banned, saying it has ruined lives with attempts to cure LGBT plus people of being themselves. However, there are serious questions about whether this would impede the ability of practitioners to treat those suffering with gender dysphoria owing to the unclear definition of conversion therapy. Well, I'm now joined by a veteran LGBT rights campaigner and one of the bravest campaigners for political rights in the country, Peter Tatchell. Peter, thank you for coming in. The difficulty with this, and you've always defended free speech as well, is how do you draw the dividing line between protecting free speech but protecting people to lead the lives they want without undue interference?
Well, we don't know the precise wording of the legislation, but the reports coming out is that will only criminalise coercive conversion practices. In other words, abusive, threatening, intimidating and physically violent conversion.
Certainly physically violent ones are already illegal. So the question is, what is it actually doing, or is it just one of these token bills that repeats what's already in law, which is something that governments do periodically?
Well, when you're being held and shouted at, abused and insulted...
That's illegal, but that's illegal already.
It's not technically illegal. It's a grey area. It's a grey area. And that's why all the world's leading professional bodies, medicine, psychiatry and counselling, say that these practices are abusive, they're harmful, And they're very damaging.
But if you're being held and shouted at, that is illegal. That is an assault to hold somebody. The law's already there. It becomes more the question of what is a father allowed to say to his child if that child, possibly as a young teenager, expresses a view of wanting to change gender. And creating that sort of uncertainty, I think, is very difficult.
Well, first of all, let me say that people are being held, abused.
OK, but that is already illegal. And
but it's not enforced.
OK,
it happens. It is not enforced.
OK, but shoplifting...
It happens in churches and places of worship all across the country.
But shoplifting isn't being enforced either. The fact we're not enforcing the law doesn't mean you need new laws. It means you need to enforce the laws that exist. And I wouldn't disagree with you on that at all. That if people are being coerced, of course, there are laws to cover that and they should be enforced. It's just why you need a specific law that seems to be, from what one's hearing, to go further than that, to make conversations potentially a grey area. And that becomes very difficult,
That will definitely not happen. There's absolutely no doubt that no one wants to prevent parents or teachers speaking to young people about sexual orientation or gender identity issues. That will not be covered by the law. No shadow of doubt whatsoever. But what also will not be covered is the use of emotional and psychological pressure. So if you're in a church or mosque setting, or if you're in a therapist chair and you're being told that you are sick, that you need curing, that you have to change, it's not physical violence, but it's a form of emotional and psychological pressure that is being used and does cause people great distress.
But what about the question of sin? Is the Catholic Church allowed to teach that certain sexual activities are sinful? Indeed, all sexual relations outside marriage are sinful.
Yes, that is not going to be covered by the law. It's only very specific, concrete attempts.
But if the priest says that from the pulpit, isn't that a coercive? Because it's attempting to persuade people to follow the teaching of the Church, and that is clearly trying to influence people's behaviour.
Yeah, but the law would only apply to specific individuals. So if someone makes a generic statement that homosexuality is wrong and people should repent, that will not be covered by the law. It'll only be if they take someone who is gay and sit them down and seek to pressure and persuade.
What if somebody goes to confession and confesses to a sexual sin? Is the priest allowed to say that is a sin and that they should sin no more when they leave, in the standard words of the of forgiveness that the priest reads out, because they are telling somebody not to repeat what they have repeated?
That will not be covered. It's attempts to change someone's sexual orientation. And the change has to be specific, it has to be concrete, it has to show that it is putting that person in undue pressure and circumstance that makes them feel distressed and anxious and indeed may provoke real psychological harm. Because some people who've been through these practices, the mild ones that we're just talking about, they have ended up with very severe depression, and some have attempted self-harm.
But this goes back to the conversations that may be held within families. Are you allowed to say to a child that, no, I'm not going to call you by another name, I'm going to carry on calling you by the name that I called you when you were born? Is that coercive?
No, but that is not about changing someone's sexual orientation. That's a separate issue.
But the gender orientation is going to be included in this?
Yes, gender orientation sexual orientation and gender identity will be included, but it won't cover things like pronouns or the expression of opinions. But it will only cover attempts to change someone by using, psychological, emotional pressure and worse.
Isn't not getting along with somebody an effort to change them because you're not accepting what they have chosen to do, and that therefore this makes it very difficult for families to have an open conversation because they will be worried about crossing this boundary when there are quite clear laws on the abusive coercion already. That would be my concern, that I don't want people to be bullied or treated badly. I want people to be free to live the lives they choose to lead. But I also think that freedom of speech is very important, and uncertain children need to be protected and need to be able to have an open conversation with their parents, or indeed with their priest, with their pastor.
Absolutely, of course. There are already more than 25 countries or regions or states within countries that have banned conversion therapy. and none of them have had any of these problems because they give freedom of speech protections. So I think that this is an anxiety that is not founded in fact, and I do not believe we will go down that road. So we've got the Australian state of Victoria, which has an excellent model that works well. We could adapt that without any fear that parents would be intimidated or threatened by the law.
All right, well, thank you very much, Peter. I think we always have the most civilised conversations, though we probably disagree quite a lot. Thank you for coming in. Coming up next, is it time to pick the triple lock? Plus, I'll be revealing Mogg, King of Mendip's roots.
Who is it? We're here for the show.
More energy this time!
Welcome to the Dinosaur Hour. I was married to a therapist.
And you survived?
I thought we were getting Hugh Laurie.
Second best.
You interviewed Saddam Hussein. What's that like?
I was terrified on playing strip poker with these three.
Ah!
No, thank you.
My CDs need to be put in alphabetical order.
Are you going to be problematic again?
The Dinosaur Hour. Sunday, the 29th of October at 9 on GB News.
Tired of the usual focus-tested, pre-prepared Westminster runaround? Well, so am I.
So you want higher taxes?
Is your department to blame for this? Are you rethinking this policy? Every Sunday at 9:30, I'll be sitting down with those in power to get the truth about the issues affecting you. Let's be honest, we've known about the cost pressures of this project for years, not months. That's the Camilla Tominey Show, a politics show with personality. On GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Patrick Christie's, Monday to Friday, 3 till 6. We tackle the day's news agenda like you've never seen before. It's high tempo, high octane, the most controversial topics, and the best guests. You will not be able to take your eyes and ears off it. I'm not afraid to ask the questions that you really want answered. 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Now then, Lee Anderson here. Join me on GB News on my show, The Real World, every Friday at 7 p.m.
I'm not eating bloody cat. Are you
Delicious.
mental?
Open your mouth. OK, here comes a train. Reminds me of the scene in Singing in the Rain.
Adam, is that a good one?
Whoa!
Join me at 7 on GB News, Britain's news channel.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
GB News, unlike other broadcasters, isn't obsessed with the London-Westminster bubble. We think there's a nation beyond the M25, and that's why we talk about the issues that matter across the land. Join me on State of the Nation, 8 to 9 o'clock, Monday to Thursday, on GB News. Daisy's listening, and you should too.
I think the most exciting bit for me is talking to ordinary people.
People who I think are ignored often by the major news channels. We're going to give news they want to hear. There's a voice there that needs to be heard. I think there's a chance here for a diversity of opinion to be expressed, which you don't find elsewhere. It's really exciting.
We don't hold back. We're free to say how decisions that are taken here
affect us all around the country. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back. I continue to identify as Jacob Rees-Mogg, and you've been getting in touch with your mail Moggs. Now, this one's actually from yesterday, because we were discussing obscure acts and how you weren't allowed to behave suspiciously with salmon. And Algernon sent in a mail Mogg saying the Salmon Act is very important. One absolutely can be prosecuted for handling a salmon suspiciously. That doesn't mean handling in a way that might imply some sort of assault on the fish's person, so to speak. It's to enable the authorities to prosecute poachers and hotels, etc., who buy fish which have been poached. I imagine there will have been lots of prosecutions for handling salmon suspiciously in recent years. So what we're really concerned about is poached salmon. If it's smoked, it's fine and probably delicious. Anyway, Algernon, thank you very much. Now, a political storm on the scale of Babette could be brewing as Downing Street has hinted at its intention to shift the forthcoming April increase to the state pension, as wage inflation is the highest of the 3 factors determining the pension increase, the triple lock, at 8.5%. The government has suggested it could revert from the total pay measurement, which included bonuses, which skews the number, to ordinary pay, which is at 7.9%. This is forecast to save the taxpayer, that's you, a total of £900 million, which at a time of huge debt interest payments and the greatest tax burden since the Second World War may be desirable, but it could be politically quite risky. Well, I'm joined now by my brilliant panel, the former Brexit Party MEP and my sister, Annunziata Rees-Mogg, and the broadcaster and social commentator, Narinder Kaur. Annunziata, if you were thinking of offending the biggest Tory voting segment of society, would you do that 6 months before an election?
Oddly enough, no. And in fact, I think it's wrong on all sorts of levels. It's political suicide. That's unquestionably true that it is the biggest group of supporters for the Conservative Party, and you'd be cutting their expected income. But also, they are people who have paid in all their lives with an expectation that they can live on it at the end of the day.
But it's not a savings account. It's not a savings account.
Well, it's a Ponzi scheme, which is
it's
a
not
big
a savings
mistake for
account.
government.
And actually, as a Labour supporter, it's probably something that I would probably now vote Tory for, because that triple lock pension is not sustainable. We can't afford it as a country. We can't keep paying out to elderly. The younger generation are not being looked after.
But these people have
their burden is not on them.
Having paid in every single year of their work.
Nothing's a guarantee.
They have, just as we are guaranteed that we will have free healthcare at the point of need, people have been guaranteed they will have a pension when they retire by the state, and that is why they have paid their subs. And most people think that that money has been put aside as they have worked.
That's very naive.
And unfortunately, it's been funding other spending, and that.
But why should their benefit be increased?
More younger workers.
Why should their Why should the younger generation keep having to suffer?
Yeah, surely that's the point, Annunziata. The younger generation, they can't get mortgages. If they can, they're paying higher interest rates.
They've got student
loans. Their cost of living
loans.
has gone up. Their wages have only just begun to catch up with inflation, and the retired have been protected every step of the way. Is that fair on younger voters?
The retired population have only been protected in recent years because they were on such a pittance a few years ago that it needed to be
boosted. Makes up for
what about pensioners who have got private pensions? So it goes to all of them, and you've got private pensions. Their houses are paid off. They've got a lot of money. They don't all need it. They don't all need a triple lock pension. And if their benefit, if you let me finish, please, if their benefit has been raised, if it needs to be raised, so should all other benefits. So why are pensioners always being... They're taking up the whole NHS as well. We look after our pensioners, we really do, but we can't sustain, we cannot, as a country, the economy cannot sustain this rise in inflation.
There are measures that should be taken that are needed because the bill is huge. I think paying back a decent level is an obligation because people have paid in. However, I think age does have to increase, that when pensions were first created, people were expected to survive for 3 to 5 years after retirement. That is now 20 years.
So keep
the very different.
Keep the triple lock but raise the pension age. Would that be a fair way of doing it?
No, I don't think we should. The triple lock is not sustainable. It should never have happened. It should never have been promised. I don't think so, no. I really don't. I think we need to encourage private pensions. We really do, because it's not fair on the younger generation. They are never going to be able to... the pensioners, they own their houses. The younger generation, it's so impossible for them to even get on the housing. Lots don't. Lots don't either. However, we can't sustain the triple. Who's going to pay for this? The taxpayer. We are paying for everything. We can't.
The taxpayer who paid it before them. But we are having too long a retirement for the country to sustain, and we're not having enough children to keep paying into this Ponzi scheme. It was a badly designed system in the first place because you are constantly relying on new money to come in. However, there are guarantees that have been made, and I don't think the government should break this fundamental one.
I think they don't have a choice, and I think that times change and we don't know. It's unpredictable, and they should not have depended on that. And actually, I would vote for Tory if they don't...
if they break the triple lock.
Honestly, I would.
Well, that's quite a promise.
Yes.
We'll have to get you back on after the next election when you have voted Tory if that's in our manifesto. But it was a manifesto commitment. That's the sort of...
Well, they've broken a lot of manifesto commitments. They've broken a lot. Why not break this one?
I've let you have the last word twice. Anyway, taking a look away from our own criminal justice problems to one posed by our Polish neighbours. A man has been arrested after posing as a mannequin in a Warsaw shop window to steal jewellery. The 22-year-old man was holding a shopping bag and posing as a mannequin in a shop window until he felt it was safe to continue with his burglary escapades. Warsaw police said that staff and shoppers failed to notice anything untoward by this particular mannequin, but he has subsequently been charged with burglary and theft and now faces up to 10 years in prison. Perhaps the Polish police should be following the Metropolitan Police's plan to use facial recognition to tackle shoplifting, providing it would work on a mannequin. Well, it's quite clever, isn't it? I mean, one disapproves of crime, and burglary is a terrible crime, and shoplifting particularly. But one always has a sneaking suspicion for those, admiration for those criminals who are really clever.
The hustle that he used there, that is, it's just strange.
I absolutely do admire his
chutzpah,
for doing this. Perhaps he should have looked a little more like, you know,
but he didn't
model.
look...
I think he looks dreadful. I mean, he doesn't even look like a
really done a great disguise there. I'm surprised they didn't notice that he had a head, unlike the other mannequins in the picture. But
did they not have heads?
But actually the shoplifting problem is the big one, isn't it? And we've had the figures today that shoplifting's gone up by 25%, that a very small number, only 10%, lead to any arrest or any action, that this is thought of as low-level criminality, but actually it has a real effect on people.
Massive, and I only discovered today that it was Theresa May who introduced a £70 fine for shoplifting under £200. Well, there's a lot of small shop owners that it doesn't take many £200 or £199 shoplifting incidents to really hurt and potentially make their businesses go under. I think we've got to take it seriously. It's the broken windows argument, that you knock the little things on the head and the bigger things.
I think people are going through dire times, and we've got a cost of living crisis, and people are stealing because they're struggling and they're poor.
It's really well documented that these are not people stealing because they are hungry or in dire need. It is gangs of people who are raiding shops for large quantities of things
I'm talking about in the smaller shops and going and stealing some bread.
But we were talking yesterday or the day before about a man who stole £500 worth of steaks. That's not because he's hungry.
Yes.
That's because he's going to try and sell them on 20 bottles of Prosecco. Yes.
How did he steal all that? But where does this come in with facial recognition? Is this what we're...
That's right, and then you can identify people.
It's dangerous. It's very dangerous. Now, the Metropolitan Police are using a very dangerous...
I think I'm always been against ID cards. I'm not a big fan of a surveillance state at all. I don't want our government to be a total big brother. But when you look at the statistics, that the 12 shops involved in this project provided 300, just over 304, I think, images to the police.
But those images could be gender and racial bias.
Of people who they had seen shoplifting and not been able to identify.
That's dangerous.
Half of them were already on the police database for other crimes. And I think this goes back to the broken windows thing, that shoplifting looks minor, but is often deeply connected.
We can't use facial recognition. It infringes on our privacy. It doesn't have our consent.
But do you deserve privacy if you're a thief? Don't you just deserve to get
But
prison
what if you're not a thief, and actually that racial recognition algorithm...
Because the facial recognition
black and brown people, it doesn't...
It won't. It will pick people up.
It's a mistake. It doesn't pick up black and brown people. The system is flawed.
The whole point
the system
of
is flawed.
New system.
It's flawed.
Is that it doesn't see colour, it doesn't see hair colour, it doesn't see skin colour. It's the biometrics of the
black and brown people. Black and brown people. No, you've got that incorrect. No. Black and brown people are 100 times more likely.
Okay.
100 times more likely.
We'll have to come back to the technical specifications of facial recognition. But finally, some hot off the press news from the 1st century BC. In pre-Roman England, a king has been added to the historical record after a coin with his name on it. Esenertos. Doesn't sound a particularly English name. Anyway, Esenertos has been unearthed in a Hampshire field. And while Esenertos, with whom I think I may have been at school, is welcome in our historic record, we ought also to think about Mogg, King of Mendip, my famous forebear and the most distinguished contemporary of St. Patrick. Anyway, that's all from me reminiscing about St. Patrick and Mogg, King of Mendip, but we've got another Patrick coming up, also pretty saintly, St. Patrick Christie's. Will you be discussing Mogg, King of Mendip?
I will not because I don't find it interesting, just because I've got other stuff on, Jacob. Stuff like Just Stop Oil getting in the way of those people getting on the Bibby Stockholm barge. Really laughable scenes. I've got a member of Just Stop Oil on. I'm also going to be talking as well about a whole host of different issues, such as the anti-Semitic chants heard at the pro-Palestine protest, the lovely artists that were decided to come out in favour of Palestine, not condemning Hamas. And I go to Denmark, all the way to Denmark, to talk about how Palestinian refugees have failed to integrate over there. Some shocking stats, an exclusive that Nigel Farage brought us, and find out as well why one bra company nearly went bust as they decided to drop woke advertising. All to play for.
Oh, that sounds extremely interesting. As always, that's coming up after the weather. I'm going to be back on Monday at 8 o'clock. I'm heading down to Somerset shortly. I'm Jacob Rees-Mogg. This has been State of the Nation. And I don't think even I can say that the sun will be shining in Somerset tomorrow. I think you might have me under the Trade Description Act.
Hello, very good evening. I'm Alex Burke, and here's your latest GB News weather update. Storm Babette is going to bring a lot of rain and some very windy weather across many parts, particularly the northeast, through the next 24 hours. We are sandwiched between a blocking high towards the northeast of us and low pressure towards the southwest, but because of that high, this frontal system in the north isn't going anywhere particularly fast. That's why the rainfall totals are going to continue to build up across eastern Scotland in particular as we go through the next day or so. Very high rainfall totals could be in excess of 200 millimetres for some parts. It is going to be a mild night with lots of wet and windy weather around, temperatures not dropping much, and gusts of winds coming in from the east of around 60-70 miles per hour for some eastern coastal parts. Friday then is going to be a wet picture for many of us. Heavy rain across Northern Ireland into northern England, and rain continuing across eastern parts of Scotland, which is why some severe disruption is quite likely. Towards the southwest though, a dry picture with a scattering of showers, and here temperatures a few degrees above average for the time of year. Elsewhere feeling cooler with the wind and the rain. It is going to be another wet day for many eastern northeastern areas on Saturday. The rain not quite as heavy as we go through Friday, but likely to cause some further issues because of the heavy rain that it's coming on the back of. Otherwise, it's a drier picture for many parts of England and Wales with a scattering of showers. Sunday looks like a quieter day with more showers possible by next week.
Who is it? We're here for the show.
More energy this time!
Welcome to the Dinosaur Hour. I was married to a therapist.
And you survived?
I thought we were getting Hugh Laurie. Second best. You interviewed Saddam Hussein. What's that like?
I was terrified. I'm playing strip poker with these three.
Oh!
No, thank you.
My CDs need to be put in alphabetical order.
Are you going to be problematic again?
The Dinosaur Hour. Sunday, the 29th of October at 9 on GB News.
What you get for breakfast is something that, if we do our jobs right, you will wake up to news that you didn't know the night before.
It's a conversation. It's not just me and Eamon.
We want to get to know you, and we want you to get to know us.
From 6, it's Breakfast with Eamon and Isabel.
Monday to Thursdays on GB News.
Britain's news channel.
People in Britain, they love free speech, but they also love fair play.
I don't care if I'm speaking somebody from a trade union, from the Labour Party, somebody from the SNP. And I think the viewers like to see that actually we can challenge one another, but in a positive way.
We think we ask the questions that people want to ask, and often we ask the questions that we wanted to ask in Parliament but never got the chance to ask.
So join us every Saturday, 10 a.m. till noon on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
Nightmare commute. Kick it up a gear with me, Patrick Christie's, at drive time, 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News Radio. You can listen online and on DAB+, on the smart speaker app, and on the GB News app. And if you've got an Alexa, all you have to say is, Alexa, play GB News. We're also on TuneIn and the Radio Player apps. From the school run to rush hour, get revved up with me, Patrick Christys, on GB News and GB News Radio.
Tired of the usual focus-tested, pre-prepared Westminster runaround? Well, so am I.
So you want higher taxes?
Is your department to blame for this? Are you rethinking this policy? Every Sunday at 9:30, I'll be sitting down with those in power to get the truth about the issues affecting you.
Let's be honest, we've known about the cost pressures of this project for years, not months.
That's the Camilla Tominey Show, a politics show with personality. On GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join us every night on GB News at 11 p.m. for Headliners, which is 3 top comedians going through the next day's news stories, which is exactly what you need, because when the establishment has gone crazy, you need some craziness to make sense of it.
Headliners. You don't have to bother reading the newspaper. We've got it covered for you. Every night at 11 p.m. and repeated every morning at 5 a.m. We won't send you to sleep like some of the other paper review shows out there.
So join us 11 p.m. every night on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
It's 9 o'clock. I'm Patrick Christys, and this is GB News Tonight. Now,